see we have 75 people joining us online. So for my friends who are joining online, karibuni sana. This is a live stream and it's a webinar, so that means you may not get the opportunity to speak, but we will be able to see your chat. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to type on the chat section. The other thing is, for those who are joining online, please feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat. Tell us where you're joining from and probably your name. I'll be picking some of those and recognizing you. So could we move closer a little bit? I want us to have a conversation. So as they do that, I want us to look back at 2022. And I have a question for us. Do you think 2022 was a better year for human rights or was a worse of year for human rights? Do you think 2022 was better for human rights or was it worse off compared to the other years for human rights? How many think that 2022 was a better year for human rights? All right. Oh, nice. Nice to see some familiar faces. Yeah. How many think that 2022 was a worse of year? Like, I mean, compared to 2021. How many think that 2022 was a worse of year? Oh, wow. All right. So who would want to share with us why they think 2022 was a worse of year? And who would want to share with us why they think 2022 was better? Yeah. If you could just project your voice, please. Thank you for the mic.
I think 2022 was better because of the awareness that has been ongoing. So in terms of mental health, there's been a lot of awareness going on. So in that regard, a lot of people have been seeking professional help when they're getting symptoms of mental illness. Unlike the other years when there was no that awareness. Like those days, when someone will get a mental illness, they either be regarded as crazy, or possessed,
yeah,
or both,
yeah,
or more.
Thank you very much. What is your name, sir?
Ian, Teacher Ian.
Teacher Ian. Thank you so much, Teacher Ian. Who wants to differ? Teacher Ian says that 2022 was better. I think, Wanuma, you said 2022 was worse off. Oh, better. Okay, let's get someone who said that 2022 was worse off. And, oh, yeah, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. My name is Arole Nicholas Louis. I feel in as far as human rights is concerned, 2022 was worse. 2022 is a year we had election coming.
Yeah.
And a lot of things were happening, especially every news every week will not miss about a body or two found in River Yala and other places. And also coming from the North Rift, it was also not a very good year in as far as, you know, the instigated cattle rustling was concerned and so many other things. So I think I'm for the opinion that 2022 was worst and I look forward to a better 2023.
Thank you. Please, your name again?
Arole Nicholas Louis.
Arole Nicholas. So Arole takes us back to the Yala, or the bodies that were found floating in River Yala, takes us to the violence and cattle rustling in the northern frontier, and he feels strongly that 2022 was worse off. Two more people. Who feels 2022 was, the ladies in the house, please. Yes, gentlemen, please. Then I would want to hear the voice of ladies in
My
this
name is Jean-Baptiste the Boogeyman. And
The boogeyman.
the Boogeyman.
Oh, okay.
So my point of view is that 2022 was the worst because I take this from the whole region perspective, where, for example, in the DRC, it is the time that we observed the breakout of the war, the conflict, in which all the members of East Africa community were obliged even to send peacekeeping, and until now we have not seen any hope to settle peaceful this conflict. And as you hear, or you have been hearing, there are many internal displaced people, and even some of them are coming in a different country, including Kenya. So I may say that it was not a good year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for helping us think beyond our borders, because human rights violations somewhere means human rights violations everywhere. Thank you. One last person. I would really like it if it's a lady this time around. Excuse me, there's a lady on this side. Just a moment. Let's hear from the lady here. I will give you a chance. I will not lock you out.
My name is Amondi Oyugi, and according to me, I believe 2022 was better when it came to prevention of maybe what will have been violation of human rights, especially around election time because of the messaging. There was a lot of concerted effort to prevent any kind of violence, election-related violence happening. So on the front of prevention of violence or prevention of violation of human rights, that was a very plus for 2022, something that is not as promising in this 2023.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Amondi. And finally, the gentleman at the back. The people online, our friends who are joining online, please. I keep checking the chat to see if any of you has... I'm looking for the camera so that I talk to my friends online. Excuse me, where is the camera? It's this one. All right. My friends online, we hope and pray that you feel part of this conversation. Would like to hear your voices. Well, of course, you're posting. I will read them for you. All right. Yes, back there.
Yes, thank you. My name is Oyowai Clive. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think 2022 was a terrible year for human rights, especially on the international plane. I think in May of 2022, the US Supreme Court rendered a decision in Dobbs, which reversed a long-standing precedent, I think a precedent that had been there in Roe versus Wade, that had been there for over 100 years, with the consequence that the protection afforded to women in terms of their sexual reproductive health was reversed. Basically, the US Supreme Court said there is no constitutional right to abortion. And I think that decision is going to have a ripple effect in all other jurisdictions across the world, given that the US is deemed to be a leader in human rights protection. So I think that was really a law for human rights throughout the world. Number two, if I am not wrong, 2022 is the year when the Ukraine-Russia conflict broke out, and that is a conflict that is continuing till date. We've seen loss of lives, loss of livelihoods. Even in this country, we can't get enough wheat because of that conflict. And that goes to the right to food, which is very elemental in our jurisdiction. So the mayhem caused by that conflict, and it is something that is continuing, and the way it's been treated, I understand a week or two ago, the ICC indicted Russian President Putin arising from that conflict. So I don't think it's a very rosy kind of outlook in terms of the year that has been for human rights protection. Thank you for giving me a chance. You almost missed out on these very good thoughts.
Thank you, Oyo, for your brilliance. And again, for taking us to the global frontier to learn a bit about human rights in 2022. These are the conversations we're going to be having tonight. It's going to be exciting, we are going to get chances to contribute. We are going to get chances to speak our minds. Of course, maybe not everyone, but as many as will be possible. The intention, as I indicated initially, was to start at 5. We've started at 5:30. We are planning to still stick to the end time, which is 8:30, and we'll get a chance to share in an evening or night snack before we leave. We put it there specifically and intentionally for our Muslim brothers and sisters who are fasting, so that they will have broken their fast and we can join them in the evening snack. For the washrooms, the ladies' room is through the door on my right. This is right? Yeah, right. Yeah. And the gentlemen, the washroom for you is through the door on my left. At this moment, if you have a piece of paper, a pen, I'd like for you to write hashtag rights22KE. 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 That is the hashtag for tonight. Is it, for those who came a little early, I said, take a picture, take a screenshot, tweet about something on human rights, of course on human rights, and tag Amnesty Kenya. Use the hashtag rights22KE, and my colleague Bill will be following closely to retweet you and possibly follow you back. The other thing, before I invite Mr. Kamau to join me on stage. You remember Mr. Kamau, for those who went to school during the 844 times? Mr. Kamau is a driver. He is a driver. Do you remember Mr. Kamau? So I'm going to be inviting Mr. Kamau. I'm not sure if he is the one, but he'll get to tell us. He'll get to tell us. I'm inviting us to go to the Amnesty Kenya website. So this is www.amnestykenya.org. You'll be able to get a copy of that report on the website. You can also check it on our social media platforms, on our Twitter. I don't know if it's possible to post a report like that on TikTok, but yeah, for sure I know the link is on Twitter. I'm not sure about TikTok and the others. So go there, begin looking at the report so that when we begin the interactions, you will be as brilliant as my friend Oreo back there. But of course, I know we have a lot to share. Thank you so much. Let me invite Mr. Kamau. Are you that Mr. Kamau, or is it different? Not the driver.
Thank you very much. Wow. Thank you very much, teacher, for welcoming us to this session and for making it so lively. I think we need to appreciate him even before he goes on so that we can encourage. More of that interaction is needed in this forum. So want to take this opportunity on behalf of the Institute for Development Studies, University of Nairobi, to welcome you all. And we are really grateful for honoring our invite. IDS, as we are popularly known, is one of the oldest institutes in Kenya conducting research on development. We are we are collaborating with Amnesty International in this very unique field of human rights. And when we were conceptualizing this launch happening today, the question was, how does the promotion of human rights affect development? And going by what most of colleagues in the House have said, it's like we cannot talk of development if human rights is violated. And human rights quite broad, and we'll be hearing about that in a short while. And that's how we see the synergy between what we are doing as the Institute for Development Studies and what we're going to hear today about the launch of human rights report. So what is IDS? IDS is, as I said, is a research, training, and teaching department within the University of Nairobi. I don't need to introduce University of Nairobi. This is where we are. Our Vice Chancellor, the management is aware that this is happening. But more substantively, I represent the Director of Research in the Institute. I can see a number of my colleagues in the house. Our students are also onboarded, and I believe also others online. Professor Karuti Kanyinga, who was supposed to be here due to some bereavement, is out of town. But as an institute, we never let a vacuum. So we have a representation from my end as his deputy in the Institute for Development Studies, and also my colleague, as we'll be getting to know them later on. So we are very excited to be part of this global event, and looking forward to reading this, the report that is being launched today, and to see how well it can inform development activities. When we are looking at development, there's something we say, there cannot be development unless there's freedom. And when you look at the Bill of Rights and other associated human rights, freedom is very critical. So even when we are talking of what is happening in the country, 2023, 2022, and 2021, they all resonate with allowing people freedom of choice. And I believe that we cannot have an application of promoting human rights unless we allow freedom, freedom to express, freedom to participate, freedom to life, freedom to all those rights that are in our Constitution, as we know it in Chapter 4, that resonate with the well-being of human beings. So it's my humble duty to welcome you all to this university, for those who are coming for the first time. For those who have been here before and they have moved out, welcome back home. And for all of us, those are already in the university, we feel very honored by your presence. So on behalf of the IDS, University of Nairobi, I wish to convey our gratitude for selecting this venue. I don't think that Amnesty International was limited in choices, but it's an honor for us to be part and parcel of this process, and therefore we thank you so much, and we wish you fruitful deliberations and discussion as we go along. Thank you very much, and feel most welcome. Thank you. Back to you.
Let's appreciate Mr. Kamau, Teacher Kamau, with a proper clap again. Thank you for the warm welcome. Every year, Amnesty International publishes a report titled The State of Human Rights in the World. And in 2022, or the report that was recently launched or is being launched here today, analyzes the state of human rights in 156 countries across the world. But there's a chapter that talks about the state of human rights here in Kenya. And even as we look at the state of human rights globally, it's always important to look internally and see where we have fallen short and what we can be able to do to be better. I'm going to invite my colleague, Benta Moige, to share with us some insights about the state of human rights report in Kenya, or the state of human rights in Kenya. And after her presentation, I will invite some panelists who will join me upstage for some great conversations. Thank you, Benta. Karibu.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here today and for taking human rights personally and taking action to ensure that Kenya realizes the Bill of Rights and acknowledges and abides by the international human rights standards. So I'm going to give a summary of our annual report and what we reported as the state of human rights in Kenya for the year 2022. And as we all know, we had general elections last year. And as many expected, even the international community expected that the elections were going to be violent. Fortunately, the elections were very peaceful. However, we saw several arrests and attempts by the state to infringe upon the rights of citizens to peacefully protest, which is still the case in 2023. And we also saw deaths that were occasioned by the General Service Unit, the police, who also tried to infringe on the right of citizens to peacefully assemble and protest. And we also saw many human rights defenders and state officers being targeted because of their work. And we made a specific mention to Elizabeth Ekaru, who was a human rights activist from Isiolo, and she was killed while she was campaigning for land rights of the people of Isiolo. We also saw the death of the returning officer for Embakasi South, Mr. Daniel Mbolu, and we also saw the death of Sheila Lumumba, who was an LGBTQ, a person of the LGBTQ, who was also killed in her residence. And up to date, none of the people who have been convicted in a court of law. However, we are aware that these cases are ongoing in court. Then we also saw 37 bodies recovered from Rivayala, which was a sad case to witness as Amnesty International. And we also noted that no one has been prosecuted and no one has been brought to justice regarding the deaths that were reported at Rivayala. Then we also saw the failure of the government to resettle about 8,000 households in Mukuru Kwanjenga who were forcibly evicted to create way for the government to construct a highway. Then we also saw that in 2022, about 3.1 million people in Kenya faced food insecurity. And this was compounded by the increased cost of living. And this has not changed much this year. And we also saw millions continue to face uncertainty regarding housing and food in Kenya. Then we also saw that the government only managed to vaccinate about 27 million adults, which is just a small fraction of the population of Kenya against COVID-19. Then we also saw that Kenyans still struggle to access basic healthcare services in the country, which is still a concern for Amnesty International. And finally, regarding the rights of women and girls, we saw progressive steps towards realizing these rights. And about 100 women were elected in to county assemblies. And then we also saw 26 women elected to the national parliament, which is a great achievement and an improvement from the previous years. And then on the sexual and reproductive rights, as Oyo mentioned, we still saw a setback, especially with a landmark ruling from Malindi, which was a progressive step towards realizing the sexual and reproductive rights of women, and it spoke extensively on the right to abortion, and it also allowed for medical practitioners to practice without fear of intimidation and fear of persecution from the government while on their line of duty, and ensuring that women and girls realize their right to health. This is a summary of the Kenyan report, and we hope to hear more from the panelists who are going to delve deeper into these issues that I have highlighted. And we also hope to hear from you what you think about the state of human rights from the previous year in Kenya. That is all. Thank you.
Now that she's back to her seat, let's appreciate her properly. Thank you, Benta. I'd like to invite our panelists for tonight. And as the panelists come forward, I want to begin thinking about questions that you'd want to pose to them. And even as we think about the questions, I would invite us to think about what can be done to make 2023 a better year for human rights. It's possible to decry the state of human rights. It's possible to feel powerless and hopeless. But I invite this conversation to become a conversation that would build hope for our country and hope for human rights in this country. So as we think about the questions, let's question each other. And also let's question our duty bearers and ask what should be done, what must be done. I'll start by inviting Michelle Oyuga to join me up front. Let's appreciate Michelle. Pick a spot. Thank you. I will invite Omar El Mawi on stage. Let's appreciate Omar. Thank you. Yeah, let's get more mics on. Thank you. Allow me to invite Professor Winnie Mitula on stage. Thank you, Prof. No, the reflector, not really, but the reflector is getting you ready for, the right to protest. Let me invite Ms. Li Fang to join us on stage. And the moderator for the panel discussion, Irungu Houghton, Karibu on stage. What is the story with the reflector?
I just want to make sure that the good professor was not arrested even before we've had this forum. My name is Irungu Houghton. I'm the Executive Director of Amnesty International Kenya. More importantly, I'm your moderator for tonight. And that is the message. It's fairly topical. Today we spent some time in Kibra trying to calm the emotions that are there. And we are reminded that really it is human rights defenders that essentially keep this world moving in the right direction. Allow me very quickly to just do a couple of things, and then I'll turn to the panel and ask them some questions, and then we'll open up to those of you who are here physically at the University of Nairobi, and also those of you who are online at the moment. And I believe we have almost the same numbers online and physically here, about 120 people in this room, and about 100 or so online. For those of you online, please project your questions in the form of chat, and we will have somebody read them out. And if you can direct them at the panelists specifically, that would be great. Benta, our country researcher for the Amnesty International Kenya, has done a good job of giving you an overview of the Kenya report. Allow me just to pick up 6 or 7 trends, global trends, that are in the 100 or so pages of the Amnesty Human Rights Report for 2022. This year, 2023, is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And one of the important points of the report essentially is to declare that international human rights standards are for all people at all times, wherever they are on the planet. If you are a human being, regardless of your identity, your age, your class, your ethnicity, you have the same human rights as anybody else. The second important point, I think, in the global report is that we saw in 2022 a number of full-blown conflicts, some of which were globally addressed and others were forgotten, unfortunately. Places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, did not get the same attention as the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The question we ask in the report is whether we have international double standards when it comes to human life and to complex emergencies and conflict. 2022 saw fragile economies. The cost of living went up, not just in Kenya, but globally. And there were very many millions of people who fell below the poverty line or were forced into flight as a result of the crisis. We also saw peaceful dissent crushed in a number of places. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people rose to protect their rights, to protect the rights of others, and many of them were met with state violence across the world. There are a number of human rights defenders, public defenders, whistleblowers, anti-corruption crusaders, wildlife defenders, environmental defenders. It doesn't matter what area of public interest you are concerned with. The one thing that you have in common is that there were people who rose across the world to protect the public interest. We also saw some progressive movements across the world in terms of sexual reproductive health rights, and one of our panelists here will speak to the local version of this. Teenagers who became pregnant in places like Tanzania saw a very vicious policy reversed to allow them to continue studying. And in the case of Zimbabwe and other places, we saw similar progressive steps to ensure that girls continue to go to school regardless of their pregnancies. We saw some movements on the death penalty. Particularly Zambia declared its intention to abolish the death penalty. And let me just end with one individual case, and that is the case of Magai Ngong, the South Sudanese teenager who was sentenced to death, but as a result of campaigns globally by Amnesty International and others, we saw his death sentence lifted, and he was able to leave the country. And without identifying which country he is in, there is a country that is very proud in this region to have welcomed him and to allow him to continue his studies. So just to say that ultimately, as our Secretary General has stated in the press release to the different the different international launches of this report, and I'll just read this section. It is easy to feel hopeless in the face of atrocities and abuses. But throughout the last year, people have shown that we are not powerless. Millions of people who are systematically oppressed by patriarchy, by racism, by discrimination, have taken to the streets to demand a better tomorrow. And they have done so in previous years, and they did so again in 2022. Let us remind all those in power that we will not be mere bystanders when they assault our dignity, they assault our equality and their freedom. And in the spirit of that quote from our Secretary General, Agnes Kalamad, and this quote was actually read in at least 4 different places in the world today, in Paris, in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and in Johannesburg, among others. Allow me to turn to our panelists and to invite them to speak to the issues that are in the report. Once again, welcome to Michelle Oyuga, Program Officer of the Kenya Legal and Ethical Issues Network, to Li Fang from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights here in Nairobi, to Professor Winnie Mitula, former director of the Institute of Development Studies, and many thanks to IDS for hosting us once again for this. Somebody had suggested we go to a 5-star hotel, but that idea was dismissed with costs. And we are now here among the people, and particularly young people, because ultimately you are leaders not just tomorrow, but even today. Allow me to also welcome Omar El-Mawi, an activist. He crosses both activism in favor of and in support of the planet. He led a wonderful coalition called Decolonize, and also worked on stopping the Lamu coal plant a couple of years ago. He has crossed over to the side of human rights and people, and now is the executive director of Muhuri, and just young in that space, I think less than a few months. So just very welcome to you, Omar, and thank you to all of you for agreeing to be with us. So I'm going to first of all ask Li Fang the question. I'm going to ask the same question to all three, so all four of you, and then I will turn over to the audience, and we will open up the conversation. Is that okay, everybody? Okay. So let me ask Li Fang, in terms of the significance of this human rights report, what do you think was, for you and the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, what was significant about 2022, and what can we learn, particularly given the tensions that we're seeing in Kenya today?
Thank you, Irungu. And good to be with you all here today. I think that firstly, just on the report, I think it's very valuable to have a recap on what is the state of human rights globally across the world, because I think it also helps to show that there are very common human rights challenges that face us all, whether they be civil and political rights, or economic, social and cultural rights, or inequalities and discrimination. And I think we did definitely see some of the issues that you pointed out played out in Kenya in 2022. It was a challenging year, but I think the significance, and I think it's also reflecting back on what was a very important year in terms of elections in Kenya, was also looking at what was actually some of the maybe progress made in some places, or in some senses, positive steps made. For example, Benta had mentioned that that during the elections, that broadly speaking, they were largely peaceful. I think that there was also part of a lot of efforts that we had engaged with as the UN, with civil society, grassroots actors, with government, with police during 2022, was looking at all of these partnerships and how we could bring together conversations and dialogues to actually look at prevention and how to build space for the engagement of citizens to be able to claim their rights and claim their rights through democratic processes, but also look at prevention of violence. And I think that was an important outcome, and that police were able to police or manage this space with a decrease in documented human rights violations, and particularly in sexual and gender-based violence, was significant. I think that some other significant issues which were picked up, I think, was also on accountability. And I think that 2022 was an important year for actually reaping some gains on long struggles for accountability for human rights violations. The conviction in the case of the murder of Willie Kimani and others. And then also important prosecutions, charges that were initiated in a 2017 elections case, which marks the first case of crimes against humanity charged in Kenya, first case of electoral SGBV, and also the first case holding commanders, seeking to hold commanders responsible, was initiated, plus also the case of police killings in terms of Corporal Rashid. So I think that these are some of the positive steps. But at the same time, I do think that it's important that the report picks out some of the challenges in terms of the rising costs of living and the challenges that this carries on into 2023, and the ongoing issues in terms of freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. And I think that for me, the important thing is to try to look at reflect on how we can guard progress made and positive steps made as we move into 2023, to not be able to lose some of the traction that is being gained. I think that there could be some dangerous moments ahead, but I think that this is where, if we can all coalesce, and also not just amongst the like-minded, but reaching out to others, other partners within the community and within government and authorities, I think that can be some of the benefits taken forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And we'll pick up some of this in conversation. Let me turn to Omar and just ask him again, from his perspective, what does he find most significant about the report, and particularly if you can touch on issues of climate change. I think there's forced evictions, and I guess the other danger is the fossil fuel frenzy that still remains despite the impact that it has on our environment. So I'll invite Omar to pick a space there and address it.
Thanks, Irungu. And it's certainly nice to be here with all of you and having this important discussion. And from where I'm sitting, I think the report was certainly much needed, and it's an eye-opener for all of us who are working around this space. Especially for me, I'm seeing there are a lot of teachers, so we not always need students, and I'm one of the students around human rights, and so to speak. And why this work becomes important, because you'll see it's hard and it's a lie if you're looking at these things in a vacuum and isolating them. There's always interrelations, and they're always integrated. Whenever there's a human rights violation, there's something that's culminated it. So it's either a climate crisis that has occurred that has caused people to not have homes to live and stuff like that. And to speak specifically on the climate crisis and what it means is that for Kenya, for you to really understand how big this problem is that Kenya, almost all of our economic sectors are dependent on the climate. You talk about agriculture, talk about tourism, talk about transport, choose any that you're going to speak about. They are always dependent on climate. And why we're mentioning it at this particular juncture, when we're talking about human rights, is because you will see the biggest cause of climate change is carbon emissions, the greenhouse gases that are being emitted. And one of the biggest ways of emitting it is the development projects that we're seeing that are coming on the country and globally. So we're talking about energy projects like coal, oil and gas and others, which are really contributing a lot in terms of the climate impacts. To be fair, Kenya is actually doing pretty good when we're talking about emissions that are coming from climate change and carbon emissions within the country. But that doesn't mean, and I would like to use an analogy from a friend of mine, that when you see your friend's house is burning, it doesn't mean that now you can also put your house on fire by saying that because someone else is doing something, then you're doing the same thing. And that's what's happening within Kenya and Africa, whereby now we are having a dash for oil and gas within the whole continent. We're seeing that because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, everyone is looking at Africa as the next frontier where they're going to be getting their resources that they will use to be able to proceed with their development. So it's really a colonial almost approach in terms of people are coming to the country, they're taking resources, they're taking them to where the global north, and all that we are left with here are the impacts and consequences that are left with. And what this means, therefore, now we are affecting the right to life, we're affecting the right to food, to health, and also the right to have an adequate standards of living. And therefore, this becomes really important. And connected with forced evictions, I mean, it's really unfortunate that whenever you see most of these developments where they're happening in marginalized communities, people who are voiceless, who are hopeless, who have no one to turn to. And they have to really struggle between should we find money to pay lawyers to go to court, or should we find money to actually feed our families? And therefore, to them, it becomes more important to feed their families. And a lot of these infringements and human rights violations are happening, and no one is really checking them. And therefore, it becomes important for us to really pay much attention to it, because at the end of the day, it's not just them that are being affected, but the chain of impacts and all the consequences when we're talking about climate change, they come to us at the end of it. If I could use the Lamu coal plant as an example, many people were saying this is a Lamu problem, this doesn't affect me in Nairobi, and therefore it shouldn't be something that I should be involved in, and therefore we can treat Lamu as the sacrificial lamb. They're going to help us with cheap electricity and all that. But when you look at it more deeply, you realize that there's a huge connection between what's happening in Lamu and what you're currently paying as your electricity bills. We were going to be paying more than 37 billion a year just to have that facility to be present. And therefore, we really need to think much deeper about these problems and really understand that it's all our problems. It is not necessarily someone else's problem that's happening within the areas. As teacher that came here before, he said, you know, human rights violations that are happening somewhere, it's human rights violations that are happening everywhere. And therefore, we need to really be involved and come in to be able to act as if it's happening on our backyard.
Thank you very much, Omar. Allow me just to turn now to Michelle, and I'm going to ask you to speak to the issue of sexual and reproductive health rights. And for those of you who have been following recent debates and issues around the LGBTIQ community, you may be forgiven for thinking that we have gone into a moral panic, you know, that there's moral hysteria and that the LGBTIQ community are about to destroy civilization on several levels. But I think what is less understood is that the movement against the LGBTIQ community is also a movement against sexual and reproductive health rights, particularly with regards to two issues. The first is comprehensive sex education, and the second issue relates to how do we stop the thousands of girls and women that have to go through unsafe abortions in our country. Last year, there was an important case that was deliberated in Malindi. Let me invite Michelle to speak a little to the significance of that case, and also if you could project a little bit in 2023. Do we have any hope in terms of dealing with the reproductive health crisis that we are told constantly in the various statistics that are released, and in particular, the Kenya Health and Demographic Survey that came out a few months ago? Michelle, that is a mouthful, but I think you've got the essence of that question.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy to be here and to share experience and even insights on the work that you do around sexual and reproductive rights. So I want to refer you to the Constitution. Article 43 of the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to the highest attainable standard of health and underscores the right to reproductive health. Now, as you were speaking about, as you were having reflections about 2022 and whether we've made traction or whether we've backtracked on human rights, I actually reflected on the Malindi case, which is our, I would say, our Roe versus Wade kind of a case. So for us to be able to understand how the court arrived at its at the determination, it's also important to know what was the genesis, what was this case about. So yes, we say that the Malindi case was a landmark, the court gave a landmark judgment because of its bold pronouncement on abortion. So let me take you back. The matter, so we call it the Park case. So there was a young girl, a Form 2 student, who got impregnated by a fellow student. So in that case, it's defilement, right? So she got impregnated, and in the course of her pregnancy, she developed complications. And this was in Malindi. So she went to seek health services at a nearby clinic. When she went there, the healthcare provider attended to her and provided emergency care. And in the course of providing emergency care, the healthcare provider noticed that she had undergone a spontaneous abortion, so which means it wasn't induced. So the medical practitioner attended to her, and in the course of attending to her, the clinic, the police, plainclothes police officers stormed into the healthcare facility, demanded patient records, including that of the young girl. They were arrested, the young girl, the 17-year-old, the medical practitioner, and 2 other workers in that particular facility. Then this young girl was taken to Kilifi County Hospital, and she was subjected to forced examination. Upon that examination, she was arrested and charged with procuring abortion. The healthcare provider was also charged with procuring an abortion. And so the first petitioner in this case, the girl, the healthcare practitioner, through the Center for Reproductive Rights, went to the High Court to contest the charges, and that is where the court made made the determination, and the court was looking at a number of issues, but I'll summarize the issues. One, whether sections 158 to 160 of the Penal Code is unconstitutional. I believe you all are familiar with our Penal Code. So the Penal Code, section 158 to 160 are the provisions around abortion. So it talks about, conditions where you'd be charged with procuring an abortion, giving toxic substance, helping somebody to procure abortion, or doing the act yourself. So when the court was determining the constitutionality of these provisions in view of Article 26(4) of the Constitution, which provides that abortion is not permitted. Article 26(4) says not permitted. It doesn't say it is illegal. So it says it's not permitted, and it gives the grounds that would allow you to get an abortion. And the grounds are if it is an emergency situation, if the life or health of the mother is in danger, or if this is permitted by any other written law. So looking at the circumstances, the court in its determination found that, one, abortion is a fundamental human right. So that was very bold. Two, the court found that subjecting a minor to the kind of treatment that the lady, or the minor in this case, went through was a violation of her rights, including the right to privacy, human dignity, freedom from torture and cruel treatment. The court also made a determination that it is important for Parliament to come up with legislation to breathe life into Article 26(4) of the Constitution, because remember, the Constitution provides the framework, but it's important for us to have statute that supports the Constitution. The judges also observed that by not having policies around abortion, then around safe abortion, and when we say safe abortion, we mean that a skilled medical practitioner is performing it, and it is being performed under certain conditions that meet the minimal requirements for a safe abortion. So it doesn't mean that anyone and anyone can perform abortion. For it to be a safe abortion, it must be done by somebody who's properly trained and in a proper facility. So the court observed that by not having policies and guidelines, then we're impeding services. Two, by not having legislation around this, we are posing a risk to many women and girls. How I conceived it is that the court looked at this as a public health issue. Remember, statistics are telling us that every year, 2,600 women die because of unsafe abortion. And these are the reported cases. Whereas about 21,000 women die because of complications arising out of unsafe abortion. So the court said, look, go back, directed Parliament to come up with legislation to breathe life into Article 26(4). Now the question is, with the current context, moving from 2022, we are now in 2023, do we see ourselves coming up with legislation? And also reflecting on the fact that the Ministry of Health in 2012, remember our constitution was promulgated in 2010. Then as we are all moving towards aligning our laws, our policies with the Constitution, the Ministry of Health came up with standards and guidelines for reducing maternal mortality and morbidity arising out of unsafe abortion. But because of the contentions around abortion, the Ministry of Health withdrew the standards and guidelines and banned trainings for medical practitioners. So yes, whereas the Constitution provides grounds for, permits certain grounds for you to be able to terminate a pregnancy, medical practitioners are not comfortable going about this, and if it is happening in a clandestine fashion. So, and we can see this in the case of Park, in the Malindi judgment, where a medical practitioner was accosted, arrested, detained for procuring an abortion, and yet the Constitution provides that in the opinion of a trained medical practitioner. and of course in line with the ground. So back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michelle. So we're going to open up in a few minutes. I do want to hear from the good professor, but first of all, I'd like you to do something, which is to take out a gadget, any gadget, but preferably one that can post. So a phone. You got excited there for a minute, huh? Yeah. It has to be non-violent. The one thing about protesting is that you cannot do this in the spirit of the Article 37 with violence. So take out your phones. Take out your phones. Take out your laptops. What I want you to do is I want you to take a photograph, a selfie, with as many people behind you as possible. Okay. Now, for those of you who are over the age of 40, you will have a migraine trying to do this because you are just not, age appropriately trained for this. Take a moment, do a thing like this. Okay, even the panelists, take a photograph, pop. Okay, I want us to do something together. We are tired of all these hashtags that attack different parts of the country. So today we are attacking so and so. Tomorrow we are attacking so and so. Let's do something positive for a change. So are you ready? On the count of 3, take a photograph of as many people as possible. Pop. Okay? All right. Now post it with the following hashtag. You can say whatever you want to say. You can say, I'm so glad I'm here. Gosh, these people look beautiful behind me. Who is that guy? Who is that woman? You can do all those things. But use the hashtag, rights22KE. RIGHTS 22KE. If you get lost, go to the Amnesty Kenya handle and you will get the correct one. So now that we have done the protocols, allow me to turn to the good professor, and I'm going to ask Winnie the following question. Globally, one of the biggest challenges was the rising cost of living and the economic crises that many countries have had. And this is very clearly a feature, as Lee has said, that is common across the world. Let me ask you a contemporary question. Given that we are in the heat of Mandamano, so far Mondays and Thursdays, who knows, it might even turn into, Babu Owino, I think, proposed every day from Monday to Friday. Just enough time for prayers and maybe to go shopping. Then you go back to protest. Given that one of the demands is around bringing down the cost of living for us all, what policy options does the government of Kenya have in terms of reducing living costs, increasing productivity, and increasing employment? Something of which I think most of you hear. As you move from the campus to the streets, you want to make sure that there is a job waiting for you, isn't it? Yes, surely. Yeah, okay. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Irungu, and thank you everybody for coming. I think before I get into that question that we can all answer, I must begin by also appreciating this forum and more so the issue of double standards that Irungu mentioned, which I think is really something that we should critically reflect on, because it's not just double standards about what is happening in Europe. Human rights is double standards even here. And you can see it even in what's going on right now. If you are an ordinary person who is flogged in because you are rioting or one thing or the other, I don't think your treatment is going to be, as that of a politician whose colleagues will all arrive at the station and the Irungus and everybody else will be there. So this concept of double standards, I think really we need to look at it deeply, not just externally, but even internally on how things are happening. The other one is another one which is more of a question and we can handle it later. This issue of human rights. We know, and there are quite a number of variables and attributes of human rights that they are given and they must be protected. But when you look at it critically, you find that it seems there is a lot of issue of environment and politics that is dictating human rights, So the question is, especially what Michelle has just shared with us, if we look globally, there are norms and standards and laws and policies. They are there. I think we are not short of that. But when you look at the practice, things are still happening. Like even if you look at Kenya and the extrajudicial, killings, we have laws against that. This issue of what she has articulated very well about when, the life of the woman is at danger, you can abort, but see what happened, that case being given. So again, I think we need to get into that debate of this issue of environment and politics vis-a-vis the legal provisions. There are so many laws, but still things are not happening. Back to what I've been asked to handle. What are the policy alternatives? One thing, I think we have to acknowledge that what's happening now is not a Kenyan issue. First is a global issue. And this all began with the COVID hit us, and we really exhausted our resources on one direction towards health. So there were limitation of resources. Then after that comes the crisis, the Russian and Ukraine crisis, which has again impacted on us. So if I was a policymaker sitting there and having what it takes, what I know is that government cannot resolve this issue on its own. Opposition cannot resolve this issue on its own. This issue needs a joint effort. And now that we talk in recent years about, governance, we don't talk about government. We talk about governance where you bring in market, you bring in civil society, you bring in the state. By now, there should have been a framework drawn from all those actors that is trying to give the government which way to go. And I don't see that which way to go coming. What I see is the religious leaders who are so compromised. Sorry for that. I'm equally religious and a Catholic. But when I see the religious people, I don't trust that if you give them this, what we are facing, they'll give us a policy. They might give us a moral ground for how we come together, morally. But when it comes to taking a proper policy action, you need that private sector that was given money to give people maize, You need that private sector. You need the civil society that can even help you in logical distribution and engagement with the populations. So I believe that the policy is not going to come from this state. What the state is going to do and is likely to do first is reactive, because the state is having a challenge in the middle of a crisis, because there is already a crisis. So when they are addressing it, they will use that lens of a crisis. But this is the time not to just use the crisis alone, because it's a global problem. Look at Senegal, look at South Africa, look at Tunisia. Everywhere there is these uprisings. So even if the human rights is going to engage with our transparency here, we are Amnesty International, we need to get into getting everybody involved. Parliament can sit in Kenya and tell us that we are going to reduce the price of maize, or tell us that we have imported maize, like they are saying, and all sorts of things. But the actual response to the citizens, where you then secure the human rights of citizens in terms of food, health, we need beyond the state. Thank you.
Excellent. Maybe a clap for the entire panel. So we're going to open up now, and I'm very excited because we're 20 minutes ahead of schedule, so it means there's more time for conversation and for engagement, which is wonderful. I'm going to invite James to basically catch the eyes of people who would like to speak and essentially run a mic. He's Kenyan by biology, so he's actually he's a good runner. He likes reggae, so that helps also with the Jamaican runners. So those two things will get him there. But before we go there, so I guess raise your hands and let James begin to organize us. James, please be gender sensitive.
Transformative.
Yes, okay. All of the age, gender, class, ask them their bank accounts. Just make sure we have a diverse group here. But I'm going to invite Billy, if you can throw any of the questions that are coming through on the chat group. Let's go to the people who are watching us this evening and take their questions first. We will do 2 rounds of questions and the panels will respond. My request is that keep your questions short, and if you want, direct them to one of the panelists, and then we will take them in response. Then we'll open up again, we'll take a response. If we are quick, we might even do 3 rounds. for those of you who like to see how questions are responded to before you raise your hands.
Yeah. So I have the questions that are 3 questions from the team that is joining us online. But before I read the question, I'd like to recognize some of the people that are joining us online. We have Ali from Kwale. We have Kelvin from Nairobi. We have Pauline Washira from Bypass. We have Eric Karisa from Kilifi Social Justice Center. We have Faith Kanyi from Thika, Clinton from Mombasa, George from Lakisama, hapa tu. Mugai Mwangi from Mweiga in Nyeri, Peter Kimathi and HRD from Isiolo, Shem from Kisii, Irene from Trans Nzoia, Jura from Kajiado, Grace from Kisumu, Abdishukri from Garissa is from Muhuri, Bernard from Makueni, just to give you an indication that we are everywhere. So now, some of the questions that came up online. We have a question from Emma in Nairobi. Emma is asking, how do you build the bridge between human rights and peace building, citing the current political situation in Kenya? The second one is really not a question, it's a comment. And this one has to do with sexual reproductive rights. It's from Mary Goretti. Mary says, unfortunately, nobody in the world has been trained on how to procure a safe abortion. Maybe someone will make a comment on that. And the third one is, what is your take on the cases of extrajudicial killings or extrajudicial executions caused by security forces in Kenya? So that the 3 questions that we have. Billy has a 4th one.
The other question that has come through is, what is AI, what is Amnesty International and other human rights activists doing to ensure that victims of extrajudicial killings get justice?
Thank you. Irungu, as I come to you for the responses, I'd like to recognize Dorcas Mumbi, our sign language interpreter. I'd also want to recognize Ochieng Gor, Baba Ochi, from the Law Society of Kenya, who is a council member. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you're all very welcome if we have not made that clear to everybody online and in physical. So I'm going to invite Omar to respond to the first question around human rights and peace building. What's the bridge between the two? And then let me invite, Michelle, if you can speak to the issue that's been raised by Mary. Is a safe abortion possible? Is what I hear. And then I think the 2 questions on extrajudicial killings, with the exception of what is Amnesty doing, although we work very closely with the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, she could probably answer that question as well. But I'm going to invite Lee, if she can speak to the question around extrajudicial killings. And then we'll take another round, so there'll be another opportunity. Omar.
No, certainly a good question, because normally whenever there are human rights violations, very rarely can we say there's peace, because both of them are going in together. But with peace building, there's also the connotation that things were really bad and you're trying to build to get to a position where people are understanding, they forgive each other and are able to move on in terms of the work that needs to be done. I think we need to understand that we are always trying to reach utopia, right? The utopia point is where Amnesty next year maybe releases a report, and then we're saying there are no human rights violations that happened in Kenya.
One paragraph report.
Yeah, we'll all be happy. I think Irungu and I will be looking for other jobs elsewhere because we'll have worked ourselves out of the jobs. But I think that's what everyone wants to see. But it's hard to get there because the reasons why these human rights violations are happening is because people feel that they need to happen so that they get what they want to get. So if you're talking about development, if you're talking about political interest, different things that are happening within the whole country. Now, be it as it may, even if they've happened, we still have to live, to see the next few years in the future. It's the same thing that some religious leaders like to say, it's not just about going to heaven. We have to live on this earth before we go to heaven. So we have to understand how to live in this earth. And that's why it becomes important to have a bridge whereby we're able to have a conflict resolution mechanisms of how to get out of the situation. Whenever there are human rights violations, how do we have a situation where we can really dialogue around the issues and to be able to really move forward behind it? There are important commissions like the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, among different other important stakeholders that are really, really doing this work. I think the faith leaders will play an important role here, you know, rather than them going into farming now and wanting to be involved around, you know, seedlings and agriculture. Maybe they could move around this and really play an important and key role in terms of bringing these issues out and people to really heal. In terms of also having the bridge is also to make sure that, you know, whenever if people think if I do a violation and we will speak about it and forgive each other, I mean, the problem with that is that the cycle will keep going. And it's what we call, you know, the definition of insanity, where we'll keep doing things the same way and expecting that things will change. You know, that's insanity. And these people, there's no cost to this. So even while we are having this peace building and moving beyond what has happened before, we also have to be very clear that if something like this happens again, then this is what's going to happen, and people are going to be not just say, you know, it's an order that I received from my superiors, but you're going to be held personally liable to all the human rights infringements that you're doing, so that we can really, really move forward. I think one other thing that we'll have to push for is also around transparency around the issues. I mean, the reports are saying, you know, we're talking about over 100, I think around 120 of missing people for last year. But if you talk to anyone, they will tell you the number is actually bigger than that. The 120 is really a conservative figure, and it's because, you know, some of those cases, you know, we don't know what has happened. We haven't yet really made you know, followed and made sure that we know what has happened. Some of these people maybe didn't have loved ones who've reported the issue. Some think the people are still missing. So all of these are issues, and we have to work more around pushing to make sure that we're getting all of this information, so that if we're moving beyond it, then we are moving by knowing we've actually considered all issues that were at play.
Thank you very much, Omar. Let me turn to Michelle. Is safe abortion possible? And you get the loadedness of that question. Huh?
Yes, and this has taken me back to my primary school days and even high school days. At some point, I was shown a video when I was in primary school, and I still remember of an abortion procedure. And in this video, it was all blood, and it was a bloody affair. I mean, it was blood, and I don't think there's anyone who's ever forgotten about that video. And I'm sure so many of us saw that video when we were in high school or even primary school. But this takes me back. This is also connected to abortion being a very dicey issue. It's highly contentious in this country. And abortion is shrouded in fear, secrecy, a lot of stigma. And all this is tied to our social norms. It's tied to stereotypes that we have. It's also tied to religious and moral beliefs that we have as people, that you know, we have a conscience, and all conversations about when life begins, you know, the rights and the limitations of rights. And because of the different views that we hold and the, you know, various stigma and stereotypes shrouding abortion, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there. And because of the misinformation and disinformation, the women or girls that need safe abortion or who consider safe abortion, you know, many of them do not have the right information. And that is why we are seeing so many women and girls dying as a result of unsafe abortion. Remember, earlier on I alluded to the figures that 2,600, we have 2,600 women and girls dying annually due to unsafe abortion, and 21,000 more, you know, getting complications arising from unsafe abortion. But it's also important for us to understand what is abortion. So we are told abortion is not just the act of inducing abortion, you know, terminating the pregnancy or evacuating the fetus, you know, doing the evacuation. Abortion can also be spontaneous. Remember, in the case of the young lady in Malindi, that one was not induced. It's something that happened. It wasn't, you know, beyond her control, how our body functions. Sometimes the body, I'm not a medical doctor, but when you interact with doctors, sometimes doctors will tell you that there are instances where the body will just reject, and you'd undergo spontaneous abortion. So back to the question, is it possible for us to have safe abortion? Yes, it's possible for us to have safe abortion with the right information and the right training. Remember, earlier on I also mentioned the issues of standards and guidelines. And I also made reference to the Constitution, Article 26, which told us that, which provides that in the opinion of a trained medical practitioner. And I also said earlier on that for an abortion to be safe, one, it must be performed by somebody who's skilled, somebody who's properly trained and who understands the nuances around the weeks, when is it safe, when is it not safe, the health circumstances of the woman, the issues of pressure and all that, and medics can advise us. So yes, it is possible for us to have safe abortion when it is being done by a skilled medical practitioner, and if it is being done in a facility that meets the minimum standards set by the health regulators. I'd also like to underscore, since I have the mic, that sexual and reproductive rights is not just about abortion, but many a times we conflate issues, and because we conflate issues and because of the stigma around abortion, we miss the point. That what we're doing is not to promote abortion willy-nilly, but to protect our women and girls from unsafe abortion. Thank you. Over to you.
I'm tempted just to take a minute, give you another minute, Michelle, just to say, what is the range of issues or areas around reproductive health rights? So we can just break that myth that it's just about abortion. What else is involved in reproductive health?
Okay, so abortion is just one, safe abortion is just one limb or one arm of sexual and reproductive rights. But sexual and reproductive rights, I want to make reference to a bill that has been proposed numerous times on reproductive health. And if you look at that bill, it's called the Reproductive Healthcare Bill. So the Reproductive Healthcare Bill encompasses different areas of reproductive health. There is prenatal health, delivery, postnatal health. It also covers access to contraception, what we commonly know as family planning. Reproductive health also covers sexual and reproductive health rights information. It also covers issues to do with surrogacy. It also covers sterilization. So we like to focus more on abortion, but reproductive health is really, really wide.
That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Let me turn to Lee on the question around extrajudicial killings. What is being done on this problem?
Well, I think just to start with, extrajudicial killings are a violation of one of the most fundamental rights, the right to life, but it actually has a much broader impact. And I think that the issues of inequalities have come out, that very frequently, not just in Kenya, but across the world, it's actually marginalized and poor communities who are more affected by extrajudicial killings. Also the impact, that's a lasting impact that is felt by the families and loved ones of victims. It has a very a wide impact. I think that the fact also in terms of impunity and what this means in terms of the rule of law and what this does in society. So there's a very large impact that needs to be addressed. In terms of what is being done, I think it's very interesting, and Omar, you brought up the issue of enforced disappearances as well. The government in its manifesto pledged to address extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. I think that these are very important pledges to try to move forward for the benefit of Kenya. Specifically, I think that the issue of justice came up, and accountability for these violations is very important through investigations and prosecutions, because this is the only way to really not just pursue justice, but also to prevent them happening. Because I think that it's also, there are a lot of people within the police, within Independent Policing Oversight Authority and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions who are committed to investigations and prosecutions. I think there's also people who are saying, you don't understand what pressures police are put under. And that's true, you see it in the demonstrations, but this does not give you the right to take away somebody's life. and use force in a way that's illegal. And I think it's also just recognizing that by holding those accountable for those killings, you're actually trying to discourage this, and it's recognizing also the fact that this is not the majority of police officers who are involved in this. This is actually the minority that you want to be able to hold accountable. So I think that these are some of the efforts on the accountability side. But in terms of justice for victims, and I'll let you speak to more, I think it's really important in terms of the role that civil society has been playing and human rights defenders have been playing to be able to assist the families of victims to be able to report crimes, to be able to follow up on them, to provide legal representation so that they can also be represented in legal processes. And then I think that more broadly also there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of training and dialogue, so that we're looking at the prevention of these issues and upholding the rule of law rather than trying to deal with it after.
Thank you very much. And we'll move to the next round of questions. I'm going to just quickly touch on a couple of things. So from a civil society point of view, the work around extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances falls in two big buckets. The first is the work that is done by the Police Reforms Working Group. This is a group of human rights organizations that are specialized in either forensic investigations, advocacy, and protection of human rights defenders, but also support to victims' families, litigation, and other areas. There is a second bucket of work, or a stream of work, that is coordinated by an interesting network called the Missing Voices Alliance. And both of those have websites. The Missing Voices Alliance is missingvoices.co.ke. I think if you're interested in this area of work, any one of these organizations could do with support from researchers, academics like yourselves, to help us to be able to either document cases or work on them. As Amnesty International, we are very active in both of these streams. Our main concern, I guess, in 2023 is that we're starting to see a number of cases beginning to slow down. The case around Baby Pendo, the case around Ahmed Rashid, the police corporal from Pangani, the cases of the teenager who was killed during COVID-19, Hussein Moyo, the case of the Kibran student from Leeds University, Carlton Minor. Many of these cases are actually taking now 3 to 4 years to be able to see some progress. And of course, the weight on the families is just horrendous. I mean, the pain that the family has to go through, waiting and being called for mentions that get abandoned, or hearings that do not proceed, is just really traumatizing for the families. But it's also becoming costly for the independent offices like the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority. They're now, in the context of the financial crisis, beginning to find it difficult to keep transporting witnesses and their personnel and families to these cases. So it is an area of major concern on this. The other thing that I would like to leave you with is the report for 2022 was released on Friday by the Missing Voices Alliance. And what we have found is that there has been a 30% drop in the number of extrajudicial killings in 2022 compared to 2021. The main conclusion we have reached from those figures is that actually when you see political will, when you see leadership within the National Police Service, within the Ministry of Interior, it is possible to bring down extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances. I won't go on because I don't want to chew up more time, but I think I would invite you to read the report and see some of the recommendations from that report. Back to you, James.
The report is available on Amnesty website, www.amnesty.org. If you check on our Twitter, the link has been shared. I'm not sure about TikTok, but
yeah.
Could be the link.
AmnestyKenya.org, not amnesty.org. Not the international one, the Kenya one.
Yeah, AmnestyKenya.org. Okay. So let's do, brilliant, many hands. So I'll take 4. So we'll begin with this gentleman, then the lady in striped blouse.
And maybe we can get another runner to join you.
Then
Ivy, I know your nationality.
And the lady in the back. Then for all of you who have those many hands up, I'll give you a chance. Oh, since I'm already here, can I just start here, then I come over here? Right. Oh, it was you.
Comrades, power. Comrades, power.
Power.
So I'm Orengo from Social Justice Movement. And one thing I'm celebrating tonight is the arrest of Ahmed Rashid. Ahmed Rashid was killing us in the ghettos like chicken. So because the Missing Voices and Police Reforms Working Groups helped so much to push this case and Ahmed Rashid was arrested, that's something worth celebrating. Comrades, power.
Power.
Down with extrajudicial killings, down.
Down.
So on to my question. We've seen the National Assembly and the executive. Currently the executive controls the National Assembly. So the Kenya Kwanza has the majority in National Assembly. And also whenever the president is meeting the CJ, the body language will tell you that the president and the court, they go to bed together. Going to bed is in quotes. So citizens of this country, definitely we've been left alone. And also we know the opposition who are paid politicians, they are on the payroll of the executive. So no paid politician can cause revolution. So to my question specifically to our good prof, what is the way forward to we as citizens? How are we going to exercise our Article 1 of the Constitution, which says sovereignty belongs to the people? Because as per my understanding from the University of Mathare, right is not a right unless it is fought for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orengo.
Thank you.
Good evening. Okay, so first of all, my dear, are you doing ASL or Kenyan? You're doing both? Okay, thank you.
And if you can also share your name, huh?
Yeah, my name is Felicia Mburu, and my question, I guess, is to all the panelists, because my area of interest, as you can tell, is women with disabilities, of which I am a member. Now, with regards to the report, thank you so much. It was quite comprehensive and a lot of information about enforced disappearances, the economic impact of COVID, and issues of access to health. Now, there's an invisibility that I'm noticing, persons with disabilities. For instance, we managed to document during the whole COVID period issues of when the lockdowns were instituted, there were several persons with disabilities who, for one reason or another, had encounters with the police. Some were shot, some disappeared, and there was a child with autism who was murdered by their family because of the economic conditions that COVID came with. There was the issue of the 10 billion disability fund that nobody has really followed up on what actually happened to it. Was it effective? Did it would serve the purpose that it was supposed to serve? And just to answer a little bit of that, no, it did not. There was the denial of health services for persons with disabilities because technically we are a lost cause. People don't see the value in having us in community. And then there's the overall mental health and well-being, because already persons with disabilities, we struggle with so many other issues. Especially those with mental health conditions. And then on top of that, these were declared non-essential services, which led to various other issues, including domestic violence, disappearances within the home, and everybody justifying it as it is okay. Sexual reproductive health rights, I don't even want to jump into that because women with disabilities, we go through a lot. Just getting a HIV test is impossible, especially when you don't have an interpreter. We had cases of women with disabilities being targeted for sexual violence because, well, law of evidence says you have to be of sound mind for you to give evidence, and that makes you the perfect victim. So is any of that actually captured in the report?
Great question.
Thank you so much. I'm Odongo Kevin from Mukuru.
Kevin, if you could stand up, please.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Odongo Kevin from Mukuru. We are so much proud of Amnesty because the role that they played in safeguarding Mukuru's demolition, it was their intervention. Well, my question is just related to the last person that I've spoken. Well, we did a research on climate change inclusion to the people living with disability. We found out that they have been sidelined for so many years. We know very well that climate change, when it strikes, it doesn't strike you the most. It strikes them the most. Like now, it's flooding. Who are being affected the most? Me, I have 2 legs. I can jump that drainage. What about them? But we tend to forget that they're just okay. The only need that they want is food, wheelchair, but we know there's a role that they can play in the space of climate inclusion. We did a summit in Mukuru. We know very well that most of the disabled have been hidden there. So my question goes to the climate change, Omar. What are Amnesty doing to bring people living with disability into the climate change space? So we'll just left it there, but another one is for the whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are still under threat. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Can we take one more?
Yeah, there is one more that's ready.
And then we'll take a last round in a minute once we've had responses.
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Otieno, and my question is about the marginalized communities. How are we engaging them in policy making, and also in creating awareness, for instance, for the climatic crisis? They'll only see the benefits for tomorrow, but they'll not see it for the near future. For instance, let's say that there is a mine that has been discovered in a place. Yes, if the mine has been extracted, it will benefit only financially. But in the near future, there'll be a bigger effect for the food, many people will be displaced and so on. So what are we doing about it, and how are we engaging them in all of this? Thank you.
Sister, remind me your name again?
Elizabeth Otieno.
Elizabeth. Okay. So maybe I can request Kevin's question, the question on climate change and persons with disability, and the question on extractive industries and its negative impact. Maybe Omar, you can pick those two. And then I think the first question went to Winnie from Orengo, which was how can citizens exercise Article 1, and maybe even, is it Article 3 that says we have an obligation to protect the Constitution? It's not just the people are sovereign, but actually we have an obligation to protect the Constitution. And then I'm not sure who would like to take the issue of people with disabilities, mental health. Actually, I think there was a question to the report, so maybe it is us. And I will start, and then maybe somebody else can pick it up. Let's start with Professor Mitula.
Thank you very much. It's a good question that everybody is struggling with, but in Kenya, we seem to be a bit lucky that we have provided for it in the Constitution, is legislated. We are expected to participate, but our participation hardly scores 30%. So it's really, really a disaster. And sometimes I keep saying that if I'm given resources, I would just invest it on how I turn around citizens to be active and responsive. Because I really see the gap and all these issues that we are facing of governance, citizens have a very big blame in terms of them getting organized, because again, you can't do it as an individual. And that's why the civil society has come into space. And I don't think we can conclude that the civil society then represents Irungu, the citizen. This is where confusion comes, because citizens sit and point out the politician is not acting well, the Senate is not acting, the parliament is the county government for Kenya, and even the county assembly. But what are we doing? Even if you do research, it's very clear, research shows it. If you can go into the Afrobarometer, www.afrobarometer.org, and see the outlook. If I had a PowerPoint, I would project here. And you see how many of us even engage with issues. Some of us are able to come and sit in a baraza or in a town hall, but those will be like the 30% or 23%. But who engaged and took up issues beyond that forum will be 1% to 3%. So it is very unfortunate, and I don't belong to the school of thought that thinks that citizens have been stopped from acting. No. Many of the citizens act when they are mobilized, either by politician or by us. Somebody has mobilized you for a particular cause, and again, some of them have even to be paid for that cause. Sometimes we even want to be paid to engage in a forum like this now, a very humble forum that shares with us what's happening around us globally and regionally and locally, and is calling upon us to act. So I think citizens need to begin being responsive, and that responsiveness is not only on human rights. We have citizens in Africa that even if you stay in a home and a tractor is blowing down the road next to your home, you are not even questioning what's this tractor doing and what could have happened that the tractor is blowing down the road next to your fence. You just don't know why. So I think let's take action. Let's get organized, because individuals can't act, and civil society alone, organized ones like Amnesty International, on their own they can't do it. They need the lower level and all those cells that we organize to respond. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Good questions asked. I'll start with the second one around marginalized communities and how they can really be engaged around climate change. And to begin with, I would like to start by saying that things are not done the way they're supposed to be done. Because if they were to be done in the correct way, we actually should not even be having this discussion. Because for me, the community, the marginalized communities have to be the engine that runs all the other plans and things that we want to do around the climate solutions that we want to impose. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are most affected. They've done the least to the consequences that we have, and therefore it's only fair that they're involved. I mean, from the different projects that I've been involved with, starting with Lamu, part of the reasons why I've been working with all of these campaigns is because they're really rooted around the communities. And for me, I know that for it to continue, for you to be able to have a sustainable campaign, you really have to anchor it within the people who are affected the most. Because if you don't do that, then what it means is, one, you will find yourself having a community who are working with you, but they're not buying to what you're doing. So they feel like this is something that Omar is coming with from Nairobi, but not necessarily as something that's affecting us as communities. And the problem with that is that it becomes very expensive to be able to do it, and then it's very easy for them to be divided and conquered. And then all of a sudden you're finding yourself without the people that have to do this work. If I could use an example in the Lamu coal plant case, the court, the National Environmental Tribunal, said that the involvement of the community and their participation within the whole EIA process, they gave the analogy like it's an oxygen that gives life to the whole process at the end of it. And therefore, without their involvement, it's the same. If I could use an example under the reproductive health, it's like giving birth to a stillborn. So you've given birth, yes, but whatever you've given birth to, it's lifeless. It doesn't necessarily mean that people will be able to proceed with it. So for me, I think it's important. It's actually crucial for you to be able to have a result at the end of it that's really supporting people. I don't want to use the bottom-up approach, so I will say the grassroots to grassroots approach. In terms of the other question around people with disability, and I agree. I mean, it's unfortunate that we're now in 2023, the 21st century, and we still have to talk about people who are not yet being involved and included in this important discussion, especially people who are affected the most by these climate impacts. When we're talking about climate crises like droughts, where people have to go long distances to get water, these people are affected the most if they are people who are not able to walk. If you're talking about hunger and all these other things, you know, they're the ones who are affected the most to speak with. And I think we have to do a lot of work in terms of making sure that we capacity build people to understand about people with disability as not an afterthought, but it's people who have to be, when we're talking about community, they have to be there as well, to be speaking around the issues that are really, and be involved. Because, to me, I normally say, the people who are not feeling the impacts, they cannot be the ones who are coming with the solutions. Because whatever solutions you are coming up with won't be speaking about them. I mean, for all of us, I think whenever, it's very hard for me, and even me, I've had an unfortunate accident when I was quite young, and I have, up to today, I do some slight limping, but I cannot say that I really feel how people with disabilities are feeling, because it's really, really sad. And that's why even nowadays, whenever I go to anywhere, I'm trying to look, is this place accessible to people with disability? I'm trying to, even in the organization that I've joined, thinking strategically, what can we do to make sure that these issues are brought into the fore? And I think the challenge that I will give to all of us is, one, people with disability not to feel that they are lesser humans. They need to feel they are equal humans. They can speak, they can come up front and really bring out their issues, because we are not seeing those voices as much. And then secondly, also for us to really try and sort of remove these biases and feeling and all these cultural beliefs, that people with disability are either cursed, their grandfather maybe at some point slept with a goat or something of the sort. These are human beings. They are facing these impacts, and it's really unfortunate that we are actually adding to these impacts and travesties that they're facing every day. And certainly, I mean, for those who are really doing work around these areas, please approach us whenever we don't necessarily include those issues. I mean, at the end of the day, we are very quick to ask for accountability to government when they're not representing us. Do the same for civil society. If you feel like certain voices are not involved, I mean, call us out. Otherwise, we become hypocrites, that we want the best representation from the government, but we're not giving the same representation for the people who are claiming to be representing.
Let me invite Benta to just speak to issues of disability rights within the report, if anything that you think would respond to the question by Felicia on the invisibility of disability rights in the report, either globally or in Kenya. Over to you.
So, first of all, I want to admit that indeed for the Kenyan report, we didn't have people with disability feature in the report. But fortunately, we featured mental health, and we also noted that we had the Mental Health Act enacted and signed into law last year. But coming back to persons with disabilities and how they feature in other rights, I must admit that we still have a lot of work in as Amnesty and as human rights researchers, and on how we report and how we document the rights of persons with disabilities. So across Africa, the persons with disabilities rights featured in the report, only that we didn't note that in Kenya. So I'll just admit that in Kenya, we still have a lot of work to do around the disability rights research.
Great.
Yeah, and as Omar has said, we need your voice to know that, there's something that we're not doing proper documentation, and that we need to do that going forward. Yeah.
Feedback is very welcome. Let me just, by show of hands, how many of you have read the Disability Act that was enacted a couple of years ago, or I think a year ago? By show of hands, please, you can also raise your legs if you want, but I suggest, particularly for those of you wearing skirts, we keep to the hands. Again? Okay. Keep them up if you've read the Mental Health Act that was passed in 2022. Gosh, 1, 2, 3. Okay, is there 4? Is there homework for all of us? Okay. I think Lee would like to contribute to this as well.
Thank you. And I think it's just also to note, in terms of also standards that we can call for the government to uphold, Kenya has actually ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And Kenya is due to report to the committee this year. And I know that we had discussed this, Felicia, and there's a whole process also. The government is going to be preparing its report. But after that, there'll be a process also for civil society to be able to make submissions. And I think that this is also really important, to be able to make visible the reality of the rights of persons with disabilities in Kenya. And I think that that's also something I think for, in terms of persons with disabilities and marginalized groups, and the word invisibility. And I think it's a conscious effort that we must all uphold ourselves to be able to actively seek to show the perspectives of and include marginalized persons in Kenya. And I think that it's anyone who's actually got some data analysis to share. I think it's really important to make this visible and bring this into more what we'd call mainstream human rights debates. Thanks.
Let's go to either people online, or we'll do the last round now, or here.
We can take one round here, then we'll go to the questions online. There are many questions. It's okay. So I'll pick. Then there's a gentleman back there. Then I'll pick the gentleman at the back. So that makes 3 from this side. I'll give you more questions now. Then, out of seniority, I'll pick him. Then I'll come to you. So, on another round. Then the lady in red. Oh, under the back. The lady in another striped blouse.
So any questions that are not able to be asked here, we are definitely going to close early so that we can network together, we can discuss with each other. The conversations do not end in this room. Let me just check. Is there anything else on any other question coming in online?
We have an avalanche.
Okay.
So we'll take that. We'll take a round.
Okay, we'll have to do very quick questions or comments.
Yeah, and please restrain yourself to one question and no lengthy introductions. Let's start from that side.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Charity Washeke. I'm from Narok. We've driven all the way 3 hours from Narok up to here. I'm a second year student in Masai Mara University.
Pause. Let's appreciate them.
I've actually been brought by my patron. I am the current sitting chairperson of Human Rights Club, Masai Mara University.
Good.
And we've just come, the 2 of us. So that is why I was very impatient with this question. The reason as to why I've actually stood up and come here in the light is because mine is not more of a question, but an eye-opener. If unsafe abortions are killing more people than they are saving, those were 2680 deaths out of unsafe abortions, then why not legalize it? You know, currently we are using deontological moral ethics instead of the teleological ones, where we're looking at what is good and what is bad ethically. But we're not thinking about what is happening currently, the situation that is happening currently. You know, if I was a mother, I would not tell my daughter that when you have sex is what is going to happen. But I think it is time we introduce sexual education in high school and also in primary school, so that our children will know what is going to happen after what they want to do has been done. They only know the negative effects, but we can even be able to avoid it. For instance, if we make this issue of abortion to be open and that everybody can know that there can be safe abortions that are going to be done, then that will be safer. Because I was saying that if this issue could be taken to parliament and we legalize abortion, many people will say that we are trying to help people to terminate what they have already done, but we are saying that if it has already happened, it has already happened and we cannot go back. So what we do, we deal with the current situation, and that is it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I do have a few of the pointers, and then I will raise in my question. Good evening to you all. My name is Alvin Mwangi Rungu. I am a writer as well as a human rights defender and the activist. So I want to just try and repaint what we know. One, there is, unfortunately, we are seeing the increase of religious fundamentalism, and what this, speaks to is the policies, the laws, the programs, and the work that, unfortunately, we are doing when it comes to the human rights. Unfortunately, we will lose. The other point, unfortunately, we are in 2023, and we still do not have the access to the access to the comprehensive sexuality education in schools. We are still struggling with the access to the safe and legal the abortion, and this is even to the survivors who would go through, rape as well as defilement, which is actually clear in law that in case, this happens, is that you need to receive the access. 3, we are still struggling with human rights for everybody. When you think about the ruling, which I think was in Feb, we are unfortunately speaking through misinformation, disinformation in terms of what the ruling actually was all about, and this is inflicting, stigma, discrimination, and also the violence to LGBTQ plus people. So if you are one of them in terms of how you got the understanding of the ruling was purely on freedom of association of anyone in this country. And then the question is, because I feel like we have, unfortunately, we've gone to the courts, we have done, the protest, we have spoken to the MPs. So in terms of the mechanisms which we feel would work, probably, are there things which we have not yet done, because we have gone to the courts, we have gone to the MPs, we even have, the research, the data, the information, the advocacy, the policies, but unfortunately we are still not yet there. So how and what are probably the other things which we can be able to say we can be able to do? Then the last key point, if you would want to actually just read the articles which I have done on all of these key 3 things, please, you are free to just search my name is Alvin Mwangi, and you'll find the articles. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin, and thank you for using this opportunity to market yourself as well. Brilliant.
Alvin writes well. Let me
Okay,
just
my
tell you,
name
as one of his readers.
Okay, my name is Peter Njenga. I'm a former street boy who was lucky to go to rehabilitation center. Then I came out and decided to come up with the X-Street Children community-based organization, which work for the best interests of street children in Eldoret. It is my pleasure to be here today because it's just a reflection of what happened last year from the month of October, whereby the county government was an issue, contacted the goons, and they were able to attack most of the street children, and eventually, most of them, they end up losing their lives. Today, as we talk, we also have a center which is called Rescue Center, which was initiated by the government, and now it has now turned to be a Sabibo, where most of the children, they are being profiled, they're being abused very badly, and also I want to call upon this panel today, if you can be able to go to Eldoret and be able to investigate the issue of child abuse, I think that is an eye tip of what's happened last year. Thank you very much.
Greetings. My name is Busera Mohammed. I have a question to the Executive Director of Amnesty, Mr. Houghton. You talked about, I have a problem with European names, sorry.
You and half of the country.
Yeah, you talked of this LGBTQ, and we who are not advocating for such, we are worried because of the association of sodomists. If we allow them to just do that which they do under the rubrics of fundamental rights and freedoms, how far can we allow them to go? Because if it's LGBTQ plus, and me, I'm a village boy, I have some cows and goats. If my goat comes and sniffs around their hands and they say now they love my goat and they need legislation to marry. So how far are we going with these issues of the association of sodomists? Number two, my question goes to Michelle. You talked of the 17-year-old girl who went through, and that is a horrific story that needs to be condemned. But you didn't tell us the flip side, because you talked of the boy who made the girl pregnant was also school-going like the girl. So in my view, they were all under the age of consent, as we talk about it in Kenya. So now you said it was a case of defilement. So what was the case of the boy? If you would answer me that one. Now, the last question goes to my sister Lee. You talk of extrajudicial killings. Now, in your organization, what are you doing also, as much as you question what we do in the third or the least developed countries? What are you doing also to question the America and Britain? Because they have a tendency of also creating crucifixion, then they kill people under the rubrics of protecting their interests. For example, they killed Gaddafi, they killed Saddam Hussein, and we know some of those things were, some organizations denied the things they were coming up with. So what are you doing also to condemn those ones, as much as you condemn us here in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before we go to the next person, brother, what is your name? I didn't catch. Mohammed, eh?
My name is Busera Mohammed.
Busara, okay. Thank you for your questions.
My name is Catherine. My question is strictly on the correlation between conflict, insecurity, development, and human rights. Because I feel like there's a very big gap, especially in Kenya. If we look at in the cases of areas where there are conflict ravaged, like the Kerio Valley region, Kapedo areas, Marsabit, Mandera, there's so much going on. And I don't know if it's lack of awareness, are we lacking transparency, are we lacking accountability, or it's the reporting which is not there. Because I feel like as human rights activists and organizations, we are not doing much in Kenya to address the human rights violations that are happening in areas in Kenya where there's so much conflict going on, and directly that affects development. And I was so excited that today we're having a discussion on the nexus between human rights and development. So I will really be happy if that is addressed, and also happy to see the professor here from the Institute of Development, and Irungu as well. If that can be addressed, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Linda Gichohi, and I'm a lawyer by profession. So my question is, where do you draw the line between the freedom of expression and online gender-based violence? We find that, especially right now in the technology world and digital space, we find that a lot of politicians, influencers, this is something that has been rampant recently. There's hate speech, there's non-consensual sharing, brigading, fake videos, doxing, and all that. So how do you, as Amnesty, promote online gender-based violence? And where do you draw the line? How do you promote just people being against online gender-based violence? And how do you draw the line between that and freedom of expression? Also, we find that what are some of the ways in which, as Amnesty, you can ensure that people are able to enjoy their digital rights and also be able to take opportunities in the digital space? Because we find that online gender-based violence prevents women especially from enjoying the opportunities. Find that women politicians, some of them even drop out of the races because of some of this online gender-based violence that manifests in the digital world. So that is my question, and I would like to know the ways. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Okay. All right, I'm going to suggest a formula. First of all, a number of you raised very important points, so I'm not going to suggest we either summarize or respond to them, but just to acknowledge them. I'm going to invite Winnie perhaps to speak to the issue of, are there new strategies that citizens and civic groups could develop around rising intolerance and hatred? That I thought was the spirit of Alvin's question. Let me invite also Lee to speak to the issue of EJKs in the rest of the world. And perhaps, let's see, Michelle, you could speak to the question of, I think there was a question that came your way, which related the 17-year-old. Are they not both minors? And what happens to young people? Perhaps also, Prof, you could touch on the issue of conflict and development. I know wherever Karuti is at the moment, Professor Karuti Kanyinga had been had confirmed actually to attend this meeting, but unfortunately, due to a bereavement, he was not able to attend. But I know that would be a question he would have leapt at, but I'm sure you would also be able to do that. And then I'll touch on the last two questions, the question around LGBTIQ and also the question around keeping women safe online. So let's maybe let's go to Lee first and then come to Michelle and then turn to Winnie. And then we will probably come to a close, but we'll do final remarks from the panel, if that's okay. Oh.
Thank you. In relation to extrajudicial killings, but also what I think that you're raising is actually targeted assassinations. Outside Kenya and outside Africa, most certainly this is something that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is looking at. I have been speaking to Kenya, not because I'm targeting Kenya, but it's because I only cover Kenya. So I think that I can only speak to what I actually know through practice. But certainly the attention of the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is equal to all countries and to all regions, and we look at violations of all rights, in particular violations of the right to life, and also on conflict related human rights in all countries and in all regions. But I do think that I would like to also speak to what you were raising first, which is about LGBTQ rights. And I think that we need to come back to what Irungu said at the very beginning, which is that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is marking its 75th anniversary this year. This is a global commitment, global values which apply to everybody, and rights which apply to all people without distinction. The same thing goes for the Constitution of Kenya. The rights and freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution of Kenya apply to all people in Kenya. It doesn't distinguish based on race, sexual orientation, or on other things. So I think that that's one thing that I think that is important to underscore. And maybe just actually on the freedom of expression and the online GBV, I think that that certainly was an issue during the elections that we had been looking at with partners, including Amnesty International Kenya. I think that it's also just creating spaces where it's safe spaces to be able to engage in dialogue, but at the same time, I think that the line between freedom of expression and hate speech and incitement is one that is very important to just be able to guard, because freedom of expression doesn't mean that you can advocate for violence or against others. So I think that that's also one thing very important to bear in mind.
Thank you. Clearly, you're paying attention to the 17-year-old. So what is the definition of a child? So if you are below 18 years, the law in this country identifies you as a child. So in this case, the petitioner in the Malindi case was a 17-year-old, and she had sexual relations with another student who was also a child by the definitions provided in law. So okay, so first we have to admit that young people are having sex, right?
Hold on a minute. Is there shock in the room? Yes. Okay, good. Continue. Okay.
You will, this is evidenced by the Kenya National Demographic Health Survey that was recently released in this year, when was it? this year, that told us, gave us the statistics on teenage pregnancies. And when you also look at the statistics of unsafe abortion, you will realize that the majority who are undergoing unsafe abortion are young people. So we have evidence that confirms that young people are having sex. Then we also have evidence that young people are engaging amongst themselves. So the question is, if children, and in this case below 18 years, are engaging amongst themselves, how are they handled? How does the law treat minors engaging with each other? And this is work, there was research that was done, and concerns were raised that one of the prisons in Mombasa, that a lot of young people are languishing in jail for having engaged in what we call consensual, non-violent sex amongst themselves. Like you're in Form 2, and you're having sex with a Form 3, or you're, okay, campus, are we all above 18? I don't know, but if you're having sex and you're not of legal age and you engage in sex amongst yourself, how are you supposed to be treated in law? So previously, the boys would go down for it because the mothers or the parents of the girl would go and report that their child has been defiled, and then the police will come for the boys and they would be prosecuted, and then we have numerous cases of this happening. So this was a concern that a lot of young people are languishing in jail for this engagement. So there are conversations and even consultations, and the policy makers and even practitioners, legal practitioners, agreed that it is important for us to appreciate the definition of a child, the limitations when it comes to children, and even the best interest of the children. Taking young people through the legal system is hard, and the system is, sexual offenses are very serious offenses in this country. So it was agreed that in instances where young people engage amongst themselves, they are not taken through the legal system of them being prosecuted for defilement in this case. Like, how do you defile each other? So then the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution came up with what you call the diversion policy. So when these matters come up, when they're reported at the police station, so what is done, the minors are diverted from the system, and depending on the engagement, because even young people, in quotes, can violently rape the other. And there are even lessons from, there's a South African case called the teddy bear case. So in South Africa, they considered when you're having minors engaging with each other, what are the parameters that you look at? One, is there close in age? Is it a 16-year-old engaging with a 6-year-old? Or is it a 16 and a 15-year-old? So you are told to look at the parameters. What is the close in age? Because there are instances where a 17-year-old can actually, I don't want to say become a predator, but you've seen a 17-year-old going for a 2-year-old or a child in diapers. So then the guidance was look at the close in age. And then, was it violent? Yeah? Because we've had instances where young people say, but this person was my boyfriend, we agreed and we had sex. But you also have instances where young people will tell you, no, this person actually accosted me and forced me to have sex. So you look at the circumstances. But in brief, there's what you call the diversion policy that guides us on how to deal with minors who engage in sex amongst themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Winnie, and because of time, and I do want us to network a little bit and to enjoy the refreshments that are here, I'm going to suggest that we don't do closing remarks, if that's okay. But people can give their closing remarks face-to-face with you outside the room.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irungu. A little bit brief on tolerance. I think tolerance is very critical, and tolerance really comes from the fact that we are different actors, we are many, we have many interests, different interests, and when we make those coded agreements, whether they are rules, regulations, or whatever, we cannot do it in such a way that everybody will be at par. Just the same debate with LGBT. We are saying we need to be tolerant. we need to be tolerant. And I like the way Kenya puts it. The previous president said, we are not ready. They didn't say they don't want LGBT, we are not ready. And I guess even the current is that they are not ready for LGBT. Not saying it's not right or it's not wrong. In other words, the state is being tolerant, but it reaches a time when you end up in a way that those doesn't become, again, we are not ready, it becomes acceptance. And I think like the way we see our brothers and sisters of different denominations in religion or totally different from us, we've reached in Kenya where we respect each, and we even end up celebrating each, you know. You can even walk into other denominations, you know, religion. And like when I'm abroad, I never care which church I get into. The nearest is the one I get into. So that's the kind of tolerance that is needed. It's very difficult to achieve when society is too conservative. So even when we debate things of LGBTQ, we are really asking for tolerance. Embedded in it is the request for people to be tolerant, to understand people from different you know, spaces, and just bear with the vices that to you, with your moral standing, does not seem right. And this is why sometimes we have to go into referendums. A number of countries have gone into referendum on the issue of LGBT. When it becomes so half-half and so contentious, then you take it to the vote, which can also still make it worse, because the losing side might still not be tolerant to the one that is practicing or so. Then the other was the issue of whether the correlation, asking about correlation of human rights and development. And actually, I want to call it synergy. I want to call it more of a synergy than correlation. There is always a synergy between those. There is no way you can practice human rights and get development when you are abusing rights. There will be no development. So development calls for peace, number one. There has to be peace. The environment has to be peaceful. Look at what is happening in our parts like the Marsabit and the rest that are now having problem. You can't access health right, you can't access freedom of movement. Every freedom is undermined when we do not have peace. So really, it is calling for those synergy that when you ensure that in a country or a region ensures that there is human rights, there is peace, there is no abuse of human rights, you are likely to start advancing your needs and development per se. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Let me ask Omar if he would like to make a comment just before we close.
Certainly, because I heard we are not going to have closing remarks. I advocated for an opportunity to say something. I really want us to live here knowing that there's still hope, that we should not give up and say that everything is screwed, there's no future, then we go and relax. I mean, because the alternative is that. It means we let the illegalities, the human rights violations, the extrajudicial killings, the people who are doing abortion because of health reasons, all of them having to face the consequences of the oppressors. I mean, as a father of 2 daughters, I mean, this is not the world that I want my daughters to get into, and I'm sure most of you are. I want to give us a challenge that when we live here, I would like using examples from some of my wise friends, where he said, you know, we should stop judging women from their past and men on their future. Because that's what we do. We are always using different parameters. When we're talking about women, we want, you know, to make sure that they have the highest standards of, I don't know, modesty and all these things, because we are guiding, you know, the dowry and the cows and all these things. But we really have to make sure that we go beyond that, because that's not the right way to really live and be safe. Really important for all of us to, you know, while we are raising the gaps and the challenges and the things that we need to address even further, I also want us to not look at ourselves as, you know, external to the work that needs to be done. So when you see there's a gap that Amnesty or Muslims for Human Rights or the academia or the Office of the High Commission on Human Rights or people who are working on reproductive health, I mean, it's upon you to raise those issues, but also if you are best placed to act on them, we really need everyone to be involved and come aboard, because in reality, the forces that we are going against are people who have big reach, they have resources, everyone who is making decisions are on their side, and therefore we need each and every one of us to be involved. Finally, the late Professor Wangari Maathai said, rights are not things that we fight only to get, but we have to fight even further to keep. So, all these things we have in the Constitution around Chapter 4, 13 years later, people are still being murdered. We're still seeing people who are not able to exercise rights that are guaranteed in the Constitution, which is the highest law in the land. We really have to come together and fight for these rights, because it doesn't stop there, having them on paper. We have to make sure that we implement them. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Omar. Just on the issue that was directed to me, I think by Busara, on the issue of the LGBTIQ. I've had a lot of conversations with religious leaders, both Catholics, Anglicans, evangelicals, and Muslim leaders, very senior leaders. And one of the things that I've tried to impress upon them is that a society that cannot accept people who are different is doomed. It is doomed. Because that extremism, that radicalization will be visited on other people. So today we will target a sexual minority. Tomorrow we'll go after people with disabilities. Then we will go after widows and elderly women. And we will look the other way when they are being murdered in places like Muranga and Kilifi and Lamu. So we have to be careful. A society that has human rights values essentially says that we sink or we swim on the basis of minorities and how the minorities and the marginalized are protected in our society. Let me address the issue that you've raised. I don't know whether you've had an opportunity to speak to a gay man or a lesbian woman or a transgender woman, a transgender person, or an intersex person. But one of the things that I have learned over many, many conversations is that in many ways, apart from their sexual orientation and apart from their sexual identity, they are very much like heterosexual people, right? The things that you value, Busara, things like housing, the things like an income, a job, safety, freedom from stigma and discrimination, all these things that you value are the same for people from the LGBTIQ community. This week we had a very, very sad case, actually. I'm still moved by this, of 5 to 10 children who have been identified by their schools as being either, let's say, just being part of the LGBTIQ community. It's not clear whether these children were just experimenting. It's not clear whether they have decided this is their life and their choice, their sexual choices. But the community in that school has labeled them, and they have been expelled. And the school is refusing to give them an examination, the opportunity to be examined in the examinations that are coming up at the end of this month. They are not even willing, the school is not even willing to write letters to allow them to be moved to another school, right? Now, again, these are not people who have decided their sexual orientation. They are simply experimenting. These are people in single-sex schools who do not perhaps have the opportunity of cross, I guess what you'd call mixed sex, or sex across the different genders. So I always plead with us as a country. In many ways, we tend to create myths around this community. For example, that homosexuality is the same as pedophilia, or it is the same as bestiality. Yeah? This is the issue you raised, Busara. Statistically, I'm just responding to you. Yeah. No, okay. Yeah, I got you the first time, and I'm sure we're having a cup of tea together later. I value that. Let me just end by saying, that the statistics tell us the Kenya Health and Demographic Survey tell us there is more pedophilia among heterosexual persons than homosexual persons. There is more deviancy, more defilement, more rape that we see among heterosexual people than homosexual people. So the issue of protecting our children, protecting each other from intimate sexual partner violence is an issue for all of us. Right? So I'm not saying it is wrong what you're saying. I'm saying let us take it to that next level. How do we keep children safe? How do we keep each other safe? You know the worst statistic from that survey that got me is that the more you're in a relationship, and particularly as you move to a marriage, the more women are endangered in relationships. Just sit with that for a minute. The institution of marriage is more dangerous, according to the statistics, than actually remaining single. Now, by the way, ladies, I am not proposing that these men here are dangerous or vice versa. As a married person, I love the institution of marriage. Yeah, I love my wife. Let me come to the last point for Busara. I will protect you when people start going into your bedroom and start telling you how to have sex. Because ultimately, we must protect the privacy of what happens in adult bedrooms. I have told my wife, please, do not open up my sex life to the nation for people to comment. Busara, I will protect your privacy in your bedroom. As long as it is consensual, as long as you are consenting adults, I will respect you. Can we end that on that note? Okay. Thank you very much. I know I've opened up discussion. We need to network. We need to network because there are people here who can do some wonderful things for this country. Allow me to turn back to Teacher Kimila with thanks to the panel. To those of you online, and particularly I was really touched by our sister who came all the way from Narok. I still remember that now. Can we just clap for ourselves, however far we have come for today.
Yeah. And a gentleman from Mount Elgon, and for all of you from Lakisama, Roaka, at the river like me. Oh yeah, so this is my colleague. Her name is Emily. She's going to make some closing remarks as we wind.
Good evening, everybody. I honestly can't believe Irungu didn't ask this. How many of you are members of Amnesty International, Kenya? Oh, we see you. Many of us are members. But for the few who are not members, kindly network with Billy. Because for the fact that you are here means you are already passionate about human rights. Yeah? So please register with Amnesty. We work as a collective. Let us fight impunity. I was hoping for closing remarks from the panelists so that I know what to say. But now that ended. Thank you very much, Irungu.
You're welcome.
But I think what we should be left with is what Omar said. Act like it is happening to you. Act like it is happening in your house, in your neighborhood. I think let us reflect on that. Yeah? Don't say, because I am not a member of LGBTQ, I don't care what happens to them. There's that very powerful saying. What was it? First they came for the Jews. I was not a Jew, so I didn't care. Yeah? There's a lot of words in there, but the end was, then they came for me, and there was nobody to speak on my behalf. That is all Amnesty does. And on behalf of Amnesty International, the staff, the board, and everybody, we want to say thank you very much for giving us your time. My age mates know by this time we are usually in bed. So we thank you for being here. please welcome for a cup of tea, for some refreshment, and let's continue interacting. We have a lot of community activities. We have what we call circles of conscience in the communities that you can join other Amnesty members and just take action within your space. Don't wait for Amnesty to come and take action. You are Amnesty. Let us repeat, I am Amnesty. Thank you very much. And I don't know if we are religious or, but thank you very much. Welcome for a cup of tea.
All right, thank you. Just before we step out, I'd like for us to formally appreciate our panelists tonight. Let's appreciate them. Thank you. I'm going to make one last announcement. As Emily has alluded, we have refreshments for us to catch up. The people on this side will use the exit on the right. You'll pick a meal card as you step out. Not right now, wait. And the people on this side will use the exit on this side. You'll pick a meal card as you step out. I hear the tea is served on takeaway cups that allows you to walk around and enjoy the conversation without having to belabor spillage. But in the spirit of this beautiful country, I'd like to invite all of us to stand up. And we will join in one very beautiful prayer called the National Anthem. And we will, I wish we could do the entire 3 stanzas, but if we do the first stanza, will we be okay? All right. I don't know about my voice, but let me try. Tujaribu hakuna Kikuyu, but we try it in English. All right. 1, 2, 3, start. O God of all creation, bless this our land and nation. Justice be our shield and defender. May we dwell in unity, peace and liberty. Plenty be found within our borders. Thank you. As we meditate upon those words, I'll ask the panelists to please be the first ones to lead the way out. Then we will follow. Thank you so much to the more than 180 of you in this room. Thank you so much to the more than close to 200 online. And we can't wait to continue working with you. Thank you. There's a bin outside. If you could just walk out with your water bottle, that would be amazing.